Hi, Jack.
Hello.
Hello, you alright? How we doing, boys?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad.
Not bad, yourself?
Yeah, I'm all good.
Ronan was just mentioning a little bit about, obviously, he's just come back from Japan. So,
Very
kind of
excited.
curious to.
Yeah, how was it?
Yeah, I don't know. It was mad, I guess. It's probably the best kind of summary. I keep
A whirlwind 2 weeks.
I think when I saw my family, I was like trying to just ends up coming out in like bursts where you sort of like and it takes a while before you end up being able to sort of string it into a sort of series of coherent anecdotes or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, it was just insane. I mean, like kind of everything that people say about Japan in terms of, I don't know, like the public transport and all that kind of stuff. You heard about the toilets, like they've got like
Yeah.
discretion toilets that like you press a button and it sort of plays water and bird song, which honestly I just feel like does not work to add discretion. It really is like having a
It highlights.
yeah, exactly. It's like having a giant audio poster saying, "Look at this guy
here
here."
is having a shit.
Honestly, so it's, and it definitely doesn't cover up the sound. So instead of just hearing like, I mean, sorry, this is just toilet humor here, but instead of just hearing a, you hear a tweet, 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 almost like a builder. So yeah,
It kind of makes me think a bit of like, you know, at uni when people just, oh, my room smells a bit, and then they just spray Febreze, but all it would do is you just have the smell of Febreze and the bad smell.
yeah.
And it just like a sickly combination. That's why I imagine it just like the audio version of that.
Sums it up pretty well. Yeah, I don't know. I like what other impressions like. I mean, I think I remember saying this about New Zealand as well, but they find a way to monetize absolutely everything. Like they had like the local park to where we were staying in Tokyo. You had to pay like a £5 just to get in, or maybe it was like £3. I don't know. But still, you had to pay money just to get into the park. It was a very nice park.
That is really bizarre.
There's a major temple in Tokyo that as you walk up to it, it's just you just walk down like a pathway of tat shops, essentially, just tat on either side. And then you get up to the temple, the sacred temple, and you walk into the temple, and there's just more tat shops in the temple. It's just like slightly classier tat. So I don't know that like I found that quite interesting because I guess I hadn't really thought before about the extent to which actually like money and religion do just go together quite well. I mean, you whip people up into like a religious fervor, I suppose, and they're already giving away money, you know, as they make their prayers, and you know, like, I mean, like every part of the religious process involved money there as well. You know, like you pay money into like a kind of prayer fountain, you pay money into a prayer box to get your like fortune. I also like Hannah got this amazing fortune that was like just everything's gonna go well for you, and I got fortune that was basically exactly the opposite. Like pretty much like hers was all like, you know, peace will come to your family and like all this kind of stuff. Mine was like death and destruction will come to your family.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Yeah, paid good money for that. Yeah, I don't know. It's just an insane experience, and the end was just a bit stressful as well because there was like a typhoon and
yeah, that sounded very intense, and then you just messaged you about it and you were like, nah, it's just a rain.
Yeah, to be honest though, like it really was. Like I think in fairness, in their defense, it's because like where we were staying in Kyoto at that point, I think is like it's surrounded by mountains or like hills. So I think maybe that acts as a little bit of a buffer, but it really was just like a rainy day in Lancaster. and like everything shut down. So like all of the Shinkansen, the bullet trains, we had to get back the next day. So we just basically like waited in hope. Next day, like beautiful blue skies, but rain had just moved further up the line, so everything was still suspended. So that was just a really stressful day, like the whole day at the train station. Like
it's interesting that the infrastructure was shut down by what you would consider pretty.
That's honestly,
weather.
So I became a real Brit and I was just complaining about the transport, and I was like, this is exactly what would get back home. And, you know, so much for the efficiency of the Japanese, you know, all this kind of stuff. But because it was chaos as well, like they weren't like releasing any information or anything, I guess because they just didn't know. They were just waiting to see how the weather unfolded. But you know, the train station was just jammed and everything. And then, like once it started running again, everybody just rushed onto the platform, and everybody queued still, which was actually pretty impressive. But like the queue just wouldn't move because every train was already jammed from the previous stations. But then gradually, like they essentially just like pushed through like all of these trains just constantly, and they just caught up on the service from throughout the day, and just kept like flying them through, people getting on the trains, and eventually we did just get on one, which was pretty impressive, to be fair, because it was rammed there, and we'd basically accepted that we probably weren't. I mean, we booked a coach ticket to get back. It was going to like give us just enough turnaround potentially to make our flight, but probably not. So we're going to have to do this overnight coach. But yeah, eventually we did get on the train, so it all worked out. But chaos.
And was it a bullet train?
Yeah, but the bullet trains are mad.
Are they cool?
You get so much space. I mean, you get probably literally double the space that you'd get in a normal train. Like, I mean, you could have like a suitcase there in front of you and still have leg room, like it's incredible. And all the chairs swivel when they get to the end stations, so it's like you're always facing forward basically, because they swivel all the chairs around. You can recline in your seat, and you don't have to worry about getting in somebody's way when you do that, because there is legit so much space that they were pretty mad.
This feels like the opposite of the last time I got a train, where I was just like, I felt like I was just crammed in the back, like unloved, uncared for, didn't have a window, didn't really have any space. It's just like, oh, okay.
It's an English train, Louis, that you got.
Yeah. Train down to London.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you guys know my situation. I move between London and Leeds quite a lot, and it's a bizarre how I think when transport becomes such a big part of your life, you do kind of get that critique of it. And you're like, how isn't this just a little bit better? It's just it's a bizarre kind of like, I don't know, competency that we have in the UK. It's like, the trains run, and they kind of look fairly looked after, but they are just very underwhelming and just not the most comfortable kind of mode of transport. So
I can't believe, I think I've ranted about this to Ronan before, but I saw a German meme, or like a meme about German people when they come to the UK and they go, oh my god, UK trains are amazing. And it's like, what?
Really?
What do you? Yeah, and I think like it was a meme about like when a German comes to the UK and realizes that all their trains are on time and they're just there like in delight, and I'm like, you clearly just went to like a London station. You didn't bother to get to any other part of the country.
Yeah,
it's either just London in this country or it's ironic, because there was no way that's like London is impressive.
I thought it was ironic, and then like in the comments it was all like people like, oh, they have it so easy. They have all these English people. They're so lucky. It's like you don't understand. But then again, I thought Germany's trains were. I just assumed they'd be efficient because they're Germans.
Same.
Apparently, they have a lot of problems with their side of things. So clearly, it's just the Japanese who've got it figured out.
But well, Spain are quite big on trains as well. We have to delve. This is not going to be a train podcast, as much as I'd love it to be.
It should be.
So ready for this.
We're respecting. I'm very passionate about the train network in our country.
Yeah, I mean, trains are great. But I mean, I was reading about how in Spain, because basically everyone lives on either the coast in Spain or like in the centre near Madrid, there's like this donut shape where people don't really live, or it's like very agricultural. And so much of these areas are connected by this high speed kind of long distance trains that the Spanish have. And they have something like the most amount of high speed long distance routes in all of Europe.
Oh, wow.
So I mean, fair play to them.
Yeah, I mean, I've always heard that like all of Europe's just a lot better than. I'd assumed that Germany sort of came under that, just a lot better than the UK.
Yeah, but I kind of assumed that Germany would have led it, but clearly not. I guess anyway, I think one of the big things you hear about it, staying on the train a lot, but I think it's just they've got a lot of interconnectivity, and I think that's what elevates. I'll leave it at this. Like my final point about trains is that the European interconnectivity means that you can go north, south, and east, west equally easily, whereas the UK there's one good train line,
to London,
and it goes from London to Edinburgh.
That's pretty much it.
Anywhere can get to London.
Yeah.
And then there's the north, the is that what do you call it? The northeast rail line that goes up to Edinburgh through York and everything. That's the only good rail line in the country. So, to all our international listeners, just be aware if you're trying to get to Manchester or Bristol or anything like that. Also, good luck, I guess.
I could be completely butchering this, but isn't that the one that they nationalised and then it like really improved? It was like the Eastern Rail. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure.
Yeah.
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 Shockingly,
Not
it's
that
crazy
we
how
do
that
politics
works.
on this podcast.
No.
I think you politicize every
Yeah,
episode.
that sounds
Ronan.
about right. Yeah.
Did you have to like? What did you eat in Japan?
So actually, yeah, like the food was incredible, and we actually found it all right as veggies. We just had to like look in advance, so it took some of the spontaneity out of it. I guess was perhaps like my only issue with it. But there were like just especially in like the major cities, you know, like Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto, where we spent a lot of the time. There was always like a number of really good veggie restaurants to choose from. Had some just incredible food, and then I mean, to be honest, we really just grazed throughout the day.
Oh, but that's not the custom. You had to sit down for it, right?
You what, sorry?
It's rude to just graze.
Oh my God.
Unless you're sitting down for it, right?
I completely forgot about that.
Have you done 2 weeks of insulting the Japanese people?
Yeah, to be fair, I think
Oh,
very much
no.
did. I don't remember any funny looks though, so yeah. That's a good point. I did not see anybody eating on the go, I guess. Yeah.
No, except for you and Hannah.
But when I say we grazed, like, I mean, yeah, we probably should have been more tactful about that, thinking about it. But they love their.
I will.
They love just sort of rethinking the whole trip. They love their like sweet stuff out there. So there's a lot of like, and they love their like weirdly they love their sort of French and Italian culture. It seems there's a lot of like French style cafes with sort of patisseries and all that kind of stuff. And this isn't particularly French, but you could often get there like these kind of cheese breads that was just like a doughy, springy bread with like some kind of cheese in the center, which is actually kind of banging and right up my street. And then weirdly like a surprising number of like Italian restaurants, and we did actually eat at one night because we were like out in like a national park, so like there was it was pretty much the only restaurant open in this whole place, and the night before we like had no luck finding anywhere, so we were feeling pretty food anxious. But interestingly, that was like, of all the places we ate in, probably the most just homogeneously Japanese. Like everybody there was East Asian, whereas like anywhere else you went, there was invariably some kind of tourist, you know, like, you know, Westerners or whatever else. But it was the pizzeria that was the most Japanese place we ate in. Yeah, no, some amazing food out there. Absolutely incredible.
Is Japan somewhere you've been, Jack, or is it somewhere that is on your bucket list, anything like that?
No, I would really like to go. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, in terms of, I think as soon as you think about places like that, you think of kind of where it's kind of as far out culturally that I've been before. Like, I mean, for me, it's only really like I've been to India and I've been to Kenya, but never really experiencing, like, I don't know, I just feel like that Japanese culture is just completely different. And yeah, it does seem really interesting. I think I'm obviously a bit overwhelmed by, it's not, you're obviously going for kind of what is going to be like an extended city break in a way, because the kind of culture there is, well, the kind of like the general geography of it is just that you're going to be going to one of the major cities. So I'm kind of, I'm envisaging it being quite busy, just quite full on. But I think if you know you're going for that, then yeah, I think it would be great, to be fair. I've always wanted to go to that place, Nara, where the deer kind of graze amongst people as well. It's supposed to be brilliant, and it just looks amazing too. So
yeah, we didn't actually do that in the end, but like they're supposed to like, bow for your food and that. But we did instead. We went and saw monkeys, which I was absolutely buzzing about. I found. Do you know like those snow monkeys that like you see bathing in the hot springs?
Yeah.
It's those like Japanese macaques. I just assumed that we weren't going to get a chance to see them, and then just like found out. I can't even remember how I found it in the end. Maybe I just looked it up on the off chance that you could see them right on the edge of Kyoto. And I swear, like every day from that point, I just kept saying to Hannah, like, well, you know, as long as we see the monkeys in Kyoto.
It feels like the penguins all over.
It was exactly like that.
That's what it was like.
You've had a taste of it. I was just completely utterly.
You were like, we need to go see the penguins in Dunedin.
No, that's exactly what it was like. Because it was like towards the end of the trip as well, and I just became like an obsessive child. They were amazing. Other than like once we were there, then I was like getting distracted by some of the birds that were up there. So we got all these monkeys about, and Hannah was laughing at me because I was like, "Look at these! It's the Oriental turtle doves. They're right here." Yeah.
Don't they have pheasants in Japan as well?
Yeah, I didn't actually see any though. No, I think they do have some funky pheasants. I'm pretty sure.
Funky peasant.
Should also be the name of my my 70s jazz fusion band.
The funky pheasant. Was it quite a planned out trip, Ronan, or was it a bit? Were you able to be spontaneous, or was it? Because obviously you were there for quite a whistle stop tour. It seems to be your
it's becoming a signature at the moment. Yeah.
your motif is fly over for 2 weeks. But was it all like planned out to the dot basically, or was it a little bit more
planned out where we were going? So like the sort of the route was planned out, and to be honest, I think is a pretty standard route. We went up to Nikko, which is still a very touristy spot, but that I think a lot of people cut out because you just have to go north, whereas like the rest of the trip you can just go south from Tokyo. But otherwise, I think it was like a pretty standard route. But then within that, I really knew very little about Japan before going. So
evidently you kept eating on the go, which is very disrespectful.
Yeah, we kind of like once we were in the places, we kind of made it up on the fly. You used kind of like things like timeout quite a lot, which is actually like really, really good for like they seem to get that kind of that sort of insider information somehow on wherever they write about. And we went to a bar that Time Out recommended in Tokyo, and it was like being invited into somebody's house party. Again, we were the only kind of like sort of white Westerners, and they were all just sort of jamming out to this like Japanese disco and like American rare groove, like all vinyl DJing and all that kind of stuff. And it was just absolutely incredible. And like the people there seemed pretty like. They just seemed pretty surprised that we were there, but like I'd assumed because it was on Time Out that it was going to be like a popular for tourists. But
sounds like you found like a little secret getaway.
Well, there's like the listening rooms and stuff. The listening bars is quite a big cultural thing in Japan. I know that like in London, a lot of people try and steal that idea and kind of set up their own like listening bar with like food and vinyls and stuff.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's what this was supposed to be. Like I have a feeling they described it as a listening bar. I mean, it definitely seemed more like it was more chaotic when we arrived than we'd been expecting it to be. I think like based on the way it was described, I was expecting something like what you've just described, where you sit with a drink and then there's kind of music playing, and it sort of turned into a whole function clearly. But I think I kind of want to check that whether that's what it was described as. But
while Ronan's looking that up, Jack, have you been to any of those like listening bars?
I haven't. I mean, Sophie she used to live even closer to Brilliant Corners, which is quite a popular one in Dalston. And there are others as well, but they always kind of just radiate that energy of this is a cool place to be. You have to be this cool to enter. But I mean, it seems really fun. I mean, I definitely like to go.
I feel a bit foolish because it's like it's one of those things. I was like, I've had the idea. It's like, it'd be really cool if that existed. I wish they did, thinking that it was like a completely original thought, but clearly it's definitely not. Like they definitely
it's always do you kind of take on something and then just put the word fusion at the end, and then it's a new idea essentially.
That's the trick, yeah.
We'll have to see if we can get into one then in some time.
Yeah, well, I guess also. I mean, have you guys? I know you have, Ronan, but you've been a jumbie, haven't you, Ronan?
Oh,
I mean, that has an element of listening bar. That also does some bits of food and cocktails, but also has a very kind of like it's the lighting, which I feel like gives a big part of the energy of a listening bar.
Is there actually like a focus on listening to the music that's playing, or is it kind of like you're just there and it's chill vibe and there's music in the background, or is it like, okay, this evening we're going to be playing back-to-back Frank Ocean, for example, and people turn up to listen to that? Like, is that actually like the point? Because when I imagined what a listening bar would be, when I thought it was my own brilliant original idea, is that you would actually like it'd be like a set list almost, and it'd be like these albums will be played this evening, and then you come and you just listen to the music, and you can have little chats and that, but like whereas you made it sounds a little bit more like it's just kind of a cool bar with cool music playing. I mean, I don't know.
I think it also radiates a lot is to do with also this like prioritizing really high quality audio equipment and like playing carefully chosen like
Ah,
records and stuff. Like I do think that there's an element of curating it, but it's also just
it's kind of more setting a mood
it's
than like engaging,
yeah, that's
right?
where the lighting comes in. You got this like kind of like down tempo, like warm lighting, and that just kind of adds to the ambience, I guess. But yeah, I'm speaking like I've been to a lot of them. I really haven't, but I'm clearly have an interest in them that I want to go to them.
Yeah.
So
I think you're right though. It's like based on the sort of things like Jumbie, and also like yeah, I've just checked this, and I'm pretty sure this is part of that same thing, that this Tangle bar that we went to, like, is part of the same kind of thing. I guess there's sort of that emphasis on like, you know, the selector role of the DJ as well. Like if you go to some bars that sort of blast out music, maybe, so you know, on one level there's an emphasis on music, but it feels almost like the music's just there to make it really hard to have conversations.
Oh,
so you
yeah.
buy more drinks, I guess.
I can't stand that.
Or for like stag do's and hen do's to kind of like sing along to
Yeah.
songs that they know, as opposed to just kind of like, you know, a bit more that sort of music selection kind of thing going on. I think that's why people love vinyl as well, innit? Like vinyl really allows for that quite well.
Oh, yeah.
Is that it's the crate digging kind of aspect. But
yeah, very much so. I think people like Madlib. If you ever watched the old kind of archive footage of him going to Japan and also I think Brazil as well, and there's kind of videos of him looking through the records there, and it's like, yeah, I think people love that type of culture because it's kind of finding new music, but also like appreciating the quality of what you're listening to. It's just very interesting, very cool.
Kind of a slower way of taking up music, isn't it? I think that's the way I think about like vinyl and stuff like that. Is I wouldn't recommend it for everybody, but like I think if you're there wanting to, it's almost like instead of watching a movie, you might read a book. It feels like that kind of energy. Instead of listening to an album on, like putting a playlist on shuffle on Spotify, you might go, oh no, I'm going to take the time to, you know, find an album, go like album hunting, have a shuffle through in a shop or whatever, bring it home, take it out the sleeve, put it on your vinyl player, plug everything in, make sure everything's working, all that kind of stuff, and then like deep listen to it or whatever they call it. I think there's like a pretentious phrase out there that's all about like really listening, you know. I think you can really listen to something on Spotify as well, but I feel like it's the whole kind of the surrounding
ritual, innit?
Ritual, that's the word I was looking for, yeah. It's the ritual that surrounds it. The same way that you might have something on TV in the background, but like Jack, you're really into movies, right? Like there's a difference between having something on in the background while you're making dinner and sitting down to watch a movie and like you're properly set up, like the way you enjoy it. And it's the ritual that surrounds it, and you put yourself into a mindset of like, this is how I'm going to engage in the media properly. Like I'm dedicating time to the media, not just having it on as well. It feels like that.
Yeah, of course. And I think also that comes into the argument of, again, if you're comparing vinyl to cinema, it's like going to the cinema and then if you're going to be really like, not like pretentious, but if you really want to get into it, it's also like going to see it because they're showing it in this format, or they're showing it, they're showing it in this original film version of this director's cut. It's like, it's the levels with which you want to engage with the art form, I guess, which, I think people are always kind of trying to show off a little bit about that, but I think if you kind of do it, if you do it earnestly and not in a pretentious way, then I think power to you, because there's definitely some better versions of stuff that exists off the mainstream or off the released version, if that makes sense.
I think if you're doing it for yourself, like you're like, I'm going to enjoy this experience more for these like rituals, then that's like you say, like fair play, enjoy yourself. I'm glad you're doing it. It's when people do it and then like use it as like a flex, like what, you only listen to that album on a shitty iPhone speaker? Sucks for you. I'd only ever see a Christopher Nolan movie at 35mm IMAX, even though there's only 15 of them in the world or whatever.
I think as well, there's also an element that you are privileging the art a little bit, because for those more kind of exclusive or whatever versions of consumption, you are often buying material things, or you are giving money to a institution like a cinema or independent listening bar. Like there is an element that you actually are doing a bit for the artist more than you are if you just flick on a Spotify song and giving them
Yeah, you're not just feeding money
tuppence.
into the conglomerate streaming machine. Yeah, 0.00. Do you have any certain movie pleasures, like you were saying about the certain films you can get a better cut of or anything like that? Is there anything you'd particularly recommend or that you personally kind of savor as a?
Well, I also quite like things which are a bit redundant in that way, because I remember when I was quite getting into film, like 16, 17, so there was definitely that element of pretentiousness probably existed more than I would like to admit. But I remember
Always does when you get into something as a teenager.
yeah, that Instagram was just there. I discovered a sepia filter. It was absolutely game over for anyone who wanted to engage. But I mean, at the time, I remember getting, speaking of Christopher Nolan, I remember getting this DVD of Memento where you can actually, on disc 2, you can watch the film. It's completely ridiculous. We can watch the film in full, like, chronological order. Because for anyone who hasn't seen it, obviously the film, the whole idea is it's in this kind of non-linear, non-chronological order, and that kind of adds to the mystery of the protagonist's story and whether he's involved, how he's involved with this murder that's happened. And yeah, you can also watch it in this special edition in complete chronological order, which I have no doubt takes away from all of the allure and all of the kind of excitement. I just think it's I like that I have it, really, because it just feels a bit bizarre and quirky.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Did you ever watch that? Does it just complete take away from it, or is it?
I mean, I don't think I've ever watched it, really. There's a few DVDs that I just own. Again, this probably does have an element of pretentiousness, but I just own because I want to say that I have it as a DVD. Like, it's.
Yeah,
I mean, that doesn't happen as much nowadays, because it happens with records because people generally engage with records still. But I mean, DVDs, like, it's rare that I am flicking on a DVD nowadays, but I still like my little collection that I've amassed over the years of random boxes.
How big is the little collection?
I mean, not crazy. Maybe 200, maybe.
I thought that's a proper collection.
I bet it's 200.
Kind of spread out.
It's a significant stack. Yeah. And does it come with you when you like move houses and stuff like that? Is it a permanent feature?
A lot of them are still at home, I think, in my kind of like wooden. So eventually, when Mum and Dad want to do that, decorate that room, I'm going to get a call of like, you need to take all your stuff out of here.
You hope so, and not that they just like throw them out like, oh, what's with all these old DVDs that no one.
Oh, they're
watches?
Definitely throwing out some of their collection, and I was like, I would have taken some of those because my dad's got quite an obsession with like B movies, like weird horror movies. Like, and I would have loved to have had some of those terrible DVDs that you've bought over the years.
You know what? Sorry, I just want to pick up on this because I know we're taking ages to get to the album, but this is just really interesting because I've always been exactly the same, where I can get almost obsessive, not just over the artistic content of something, but just the thing and the physicality of that thing. And I've never quite been able to understand it or explain it, but it's really, really distinct. And I was exactly the same with kind of DVDs, although I never ended up with like 200. But like, I kept buying them for longer probably than I needed to, given the way that the world was changing. And I'm still the same with books, where like, I mean, I know a lot of people get this, so like books are perhaps one of the most relatable, like where there's just something about that physicality of a book that's hard to it's hard to really compare by getting something up on a Kindle or something. And I mean, I've really got back into reading over the last year or so, and it's unlocked some kind of like just weird childhood behaviors, and Hannah's been cracking up at it because like I just like love holding the books, and I'll just sort of pick them up and just sort of hold them with no real end or purpose, and I'll take them with me sometimes when I'm really just not going to read them, but there's just something about having it.
But just in case, you never know. You might find 5 minutes somewhere.
But it's not even at that point about the just in case. I might use that reasoning, but I know deep down it's not. There's just something about knowing that it's there, and I can't quite explain what
it feels
what
good
is.
To have a book.
Yeah,
it feels good. It feels like grown up and like cool and I don't know. You're right. It's hard to place it.
I think talking about, again, I was saying the impracticality of the DVD that I had, that exists with books when you buy like these ridiculous size hardbacks, or at least I do sometimes, because I just want to have it in that I want to have it in that form, but like trying to read that on the go is just totally ridiculous and impractical if it's like a book above 500 pages. But it just feels great to see that on a shelf and know that at some point I've read that, even if it's not that exact copy, I've read that and that is a book that I enjoy. I feel like you're honouring it somewhat by having it in this really nice format.
Well, you know what's absolutely... Oh, go on, Ronan.
No. I was going to ruin the transition there, so it's not. I wasn't going to add anything. Louis, go.
I was just gonna say, you know what's absolutely impossible to own in any physical variation whatsoever? I mean, I don't know, you might be able to get a CD of it, but vinyl absolutely doesn't exist. Is Blonde by Frank Ocean.
Very nice. Very nice.
Beautifully done.
Smooth.
More of something else entirely.
Jack, would you like to tell us about the album you have chosen for today?
Yeah, so I mean, Frank Ocean, I assume a lot of people are familiar with his work, or at least kind of him as a person, despite the fact that he is quite a mysterious character in modern pop and music culture, is an artist originally from New Orleans, and despite being kind of existing in releasing music for like over, I guess close to, over 20 years now, hasn't really released a great deal of music. So he's kind of had his initial mixtape, which was Nostalgia Ultra, which was this kind of free released, it probably existed on something like, I don't even know now, like a LimeWire, kind of people would stream it. It was kind of given free to people, but it wasn't really released formally. And part of the reason for that was all of these samples and covers that he did on it. A lot of them just weren't cleared. So it was this kind of weird mishmash of covers of stuff like everything from the Eagles to Coldplay to MGMT. So all of these kind of very unique covers. But that kind of got Frank Ocean all this attention from like a major record label like Def Jam. They signed him basically. And then I think about, I don't know, maybe like 5 or so years later, I basically know that Channel Orange releases in 2012. So this is his major debut LP, immediate critical and kind of commercial success. Has like all these great kind of, it just has a very smooth production in it. It's very kind of R&B, 70s R&B, soul influences, plus some really great features, some people like Earl Sweatshirt on Super Rich Kids, and also John Mayer on White, and also Andre 3000 on Pink Matter, I believe. Yeah. So then all of this kind of fame is coming about. He even does, because as we kind of come to expect now, he doesn't really do many kind of interviews or press junkets. He does some kind of interviews. He even tours a little bit. He supports, or at least he is supposed to support Coldplay, and then doesn't really support them. I think he basically cancels that support tour that he was doing with them, which, I mean, he was supposed to support them in like Manchester, I remember. And fully cancelled that, but that would be quite a bizarre show to have seen, I guess, in hindsight. Yeah. There's all this success and hype around him, and then he just kind of disappears for a long time. I mean, he does have some features on, especially like Watch the Throne with Jay-Z and Kanye, and he has a kind of bit of presence. He's never fully gone, but he's also just not really like giving you much to kind of consume. There's some like teasing of like an album being recorded, and it's constantly getting kind of pushed back. The initial kind of name for this project is like Boys Don't Cry, and it's also kind of going to be released alongside this magazine. It doesn't really happen. And then all of a sudden, August 1st, 2016, this live stream on his website just kind of drops, completely mysterious, not really giving much to anyone, but it has kind of what people can hear as new music. Fast forward about 2 weeks' time, and this stream that's been kind of playing constantly, which shows kind of Frank Ocean basically building a staircase, very random. Again, on the talk of pretentious, it's kind of borders on this bizarre, very artsy, because it's in black and white, of course. It's condensed into this visual album, which is called Endless, that released on Apple Music. And people believe they've got the Frank Ocean album, the finished product of what we've been waiting for essentially 5 years. But the day after, we get Blonde, completely dropped almost on surprise. But that is the sophomore album that we get. It's Blonde. It's an hour long. It's a lot more focused, I guess, in ways that Endless wasn't. Endless sounded more like demos and kind of creative ideas. Blonde definitely has a lot of experimental stuff going on, but it's more clearly an album for people with which people should engage. Endless is just kind of like, much more abstract project, but definitely deserves a lot of discussion as well. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at. And I guess in my personal experience, it drops at a time just before I'm about to go off to university. My first kind of memories listening to it is in a car with my friend Billy driving in Middlesbrough, this place called Roseby Topping. It's like kind of a bit of a hill. It's as close as we'll get to a kind of a cultural artifact besides the transporter bridge. And yeah, I remember listening to it there, having kind of listened to his previous stuff with all my friends and being a bit like, what is this? Like, this is just not what the Frank Ocean is. Like, where are the drums? Like, where is the beat in this? And it was a very different listening experience to what I was expecting. And I think that kind of brings us on to some sort of a discussion about it's just one of those albums that I feel like not many people surely, unless they kind of like to conflate it, but enjoyed that much the first time. It's a very bizarre album to just kind of pick up first time and be
very
like,
much grower, this one, isn't it?
Very much.
This was you bringing the album on for us was kind of like the first time I listened to the album as a whole, because I think by the time I came to I wasn't like a Frank Ocean fan like from the early days or anything like that. I came to Frank Ocean quite late. I think I came to Frank like after I'd already discovered like his work through Tyler the Creator, and obviously those kind of collaborations came a bit later anyway. Like hearing Frank on Flower Boy led me to Frank's body of work, and that was an album that came after Blonde. So I was like late arriving to Frank, and then I listened to a bunch of the singles and some of the bigger hits, and then Blonde was always this album that like everybody talks about being incredible, and it's like, oh, I'll need to come to that at some point. And now I finally have had the excuse, and I've given it a load of listens now. But on my first proper listen for this, when Nike started, I was like, I don't like that chipmunk voice. But now, on my like fourth re-listen, I'm like, I get it. I had the come to Frank moment of like, oh, yeah, it works. So I can definitely see why this is for everybody, whether you're a Frank Ocean fan back in the day or like coming to it fresh. It's one of those ones that like, it's like an onion, you know? You're peeling away the layers.
It surprised me, Louis, that for some reason I just assumed that you loved this album. This seems like just such a you album somehow, and I now I don't know why I think that, but I just kind of accepted it unquestioningly, and so that threw me for a second. But
I think I've had a lot of Frank on playlists over the years, so like that would
probably add
informed,
to it.
like playlists we mentioned in the past, like our English summer ones and various party ones, and one like I've got a playlist that's called Vibing Out, which the whole vibe of that playlist is Blonde-esque.
Sure.
So like it's just an album that's just been like, and there's a lot of songs on it that I have in playlists. It's just an album that I never listened to in full, and didn't give it the opportunity to kind of have that full listening experience back to back to back.
Well, whilst we're doing like personal relationships to it, I might as well just kind of give my own, because this is really interesting. I'm not sure there's been many like sort of like guests who have come on here and suggested an album that actually I already felt quite familiar with, and sort of like have my own relationship to it. And for me, I mean, there's some similarities in that I started listening to it back in 2016 as well, but it was probably just as I'd arrived at uni, and I think I also hadn't really listened to any Frank Ocean before. I really wasn't that familiar with anything R&B, I wouldn't say. I mean, like, to call this R&B is probably too restrictive, but you know, for the purposes. So it's kind of interesting for me coming into it like that, and also because of that, like, I don't remember finding the lack of drums or anything too shocking, because I guess I was probably coming at it just from a broadly like indie kind of angle, I suppose. And so it's probably all of these other things.
You were crawling out of the indie.
Yeah, I guess so. You know, there'd been other explorations going on like around the same time, but yeah, this is probably my first proper foray into like that sort of R&B side. So it's really probably like things like those vocals that are just so distinct and are so contemporary, you know, like all the use of autotune and all that kind of stuff. And probably around the same kind of time, maybe that very same year, Bon Iver released his 22 a Million. When was that? I'm just going to double check that actually.
And that must have been very, very close, I think because I remember listening to that in the same summer. I would hazard a guess that it came out before.
September 2016. So right around the same time, and very similar in vibes. And obviously, one person's kind of coming from the R&B and then sort of like moving more into whatever this nebulous center is, and Bon Iver is coming more from that sort of indie folk end and ending up in this new nebulous center, this new sound, whatever it is, but a lot of similarities in a way. So like I guess I think of the two together to some extent as that kind of like very much sound like a new sound without, I think I've probably talked a lot before and sort of sometimes still fall into the trap of thinking like a new sound has to be like dissonant or like, just something that sounds completely like not music the first time you hear it. But these are beautiful new sounds, but so very like contemporary, I guess. Yeah, so like, I don't know so I was getting all these kind of flashbacks to that. I mean, I've listened to it lots since then, but it probably a little part of it does still make me think of back then, that sort of time.
Yeah, I feel like you two were prime. This dropped. God, I should have been on the ball with this as well. It dropped just prime time for you two, starting uni, and then having this album to like take you back to those memories. Because this is like nostalgia. And I mean, obviously his mixtape was Nostalgia Ultra, but this is like nostalgia distilled into musical form. I feel like you come into some of these songs like for the first time, and re-listening to the ones that I already knew, you can't help but feel certain emotions from the way the instrumentals work. So like, I can only imagine how like vividly it might like flood either of you with like that weird, nervous, anxious build up to starting university, and then that whole like life shift being associated with something like this. That's quite a perfectly timed moment almost.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is some pieces of music and film and whatever that I think about in this kind of weird way of like I'm almost quite privileged to being at a certain age when it was released, because like we hear stories of like I guess our parents' age and all that of when the Smiths was out, or the Joy Division, or anything of that kind of era. And it's like, oh my god, to have experienced that firsthand, not to have experienced it as kind of like a hand me down, and in this nostalgic way, there's almost this authenticity that we associate with it. And yeah, I do feel that a lot with Blonde, because I never really kind of jumped into the critical kind of the critical kind of arguments about it and stuff straight away. I never really looked at it as like, oh my god, it's the best album ever or anything. But I was kind of, as I've got more aware of that, I'm a bit like, oh wow, that's kind of, yeah, it's evolved so much. And I think as Frank Ocean has became even less involved with his fans, it's almost like it became this bizarre cultural artifact. So yeah, it's an interesting album, if not just for the way it sounds, but also for the way it exists in popular culture now.
How did you develop, like, from going from, like you were saying, the first time you listened to it with your friend Billy, being like, where are the drums? Like, how many re-listens did it take for you to kind of click with it? And what made you come back to it after the first time, being like, oh, this isn't what we wanted?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always kind of wanted. I mean, everyone, if you like an artist and they release something that you're not fully on board with initially, I think there's still that kind of stubbornness of I want to find the goodness in it. I want to find before you write it off completely. I'm not saying I do that with every artist. I only have artists that I like and nothing they can do is bad. But I think with this, there was enough in there which intrigued me to go back to it. And I think as well, like as the kind of release of the credits and all of the kind of production credits and all the kind of people who'd worked on the album, the inspirations, it kind of inspired this interest that I had in the same way that you get when you discover an artist and you're like, okay, I want to listen to all of their influences or all of the music that came before that. And when I was seeing that like people like Young Lean and James Blake and Beyonce had credits on the album, and also the guitarist from Vampire Weekend, I was like, shit, this is like a really bizarre like concoction of sounds, and like maybe there's something I need to dive into a bit deeper. I think as well, I always have kind of stubbornness that I I have to revisit it in this kind of album format. It's quite a bizarre album in the sense that if you've shuffled it, I guess you're losing some of the essence of, the kind of maturity or the kind of growth that happens over the album. Because it's an album so much about youth and the loss of youth and nostalgia. You feel like when you're listening to it in chronological order, first off, it's quite long. It's about an hour long. And so you kind of have to go through the motions of how the sound changes and how the story changes. But to kind of dive out of that was a bit like, okay, that's a bit hard. So every time I was wanting to engage with it, I was like, okay, I want to put some time aside and properly listen to the full thing. And with that just comes a bit more appreciation because you are, engaging with it in, I guess, the intended way. So it was a bizarre journey, and every time I listen to it now, I still kind of get new feelings about it or get new kind of new experiences from it. So it's always growing as an album, really, in my experience.
It is one of those albums that feels ripe for, kind of like you say, so finding new favorites in it, finding new moments that just really click with you in a really distinct way. And I really relate to that feeling of hearing something the first time and then giving it more time. I think because I came at it similarly, but I think I came at it having, I think, and I can't think where I'd have seen this now, but just had a sense that it had buzz around it, and I was probably quite consciously trying to like broaden my musical horizons, so I think of it also in a sort of similar breath to like Kendrick's To Pimp a Butterfly, which had come out the year before, and I was listening to that, and that was another album that like I listened to it the first time, and I don't ever remember with either of them feeling anything that put me off or that I didn't like about them, but I knew immediately that they were different to the range of stuff that I was currently working within, I guess. And there is something about both of those albums, but keep on topic with this one, that does draw you in and keeps you kind of listening for more. And like I found, even years after, like I remember hearing like Nike's. Again, I never disliked it, but it never jumped out to me either. It was just the opening track. For whatever reason, it was just nothing special to me. And then weirdly, I heard it in a bar in Manchester, sort of after uni, so several years after it had come out. And just for whatever reason, just I guess hearing it out of the blue, just being like, oh, that's familiar. Oh, that's Frank Ocean, and it just completely clicks. And I guess that sort of sparseness of the arrangement, and just the sparse simplicity, I guess the term I'm looking for, just really jumped out to me, and it was just incredible. And suddenly like that song just pops up on playlists now every so often, just all the time. I just love it. And there's something incredible about those albums that contain that magic to constantly be offering something more, I guess.
The fact that it can just pop up out of the blue and grab you again, and the fact that every time, like you were saying, like some of those ones that makes you rethink. Every time I've done a re-listen to it, I've changed my mind on what I want to pick for my favorite songs. So I don't know if they're gonna stay the same by the time we even get to the end of this discussion. Yeah. And it's weird. I like that you picked up on the kind of sparseness of the album, because it's very uncomplicated, and I don't know if that. I think that lends a lot to its power, is that it's quite like it's uncomplicated, which allows it to be quite emotionally raw, and it allows it's personal. Like it's definitely like Frank's like diary almost, but also the instrumentation is affecting enough that you can also kind of apply your own feelings in any moment. And I think that's probably like you were saying, Jack, about how it kind of landed at a time that was right. And I think it hit for a lot of people. I don't know what it was about the year 2016. Fantastic year for music, as has been pointed out loads of times, but also I think there was a lot going on in a lot of people's lives emotionally at that stage. Maybe that's, biased because of the people that we knew of certain ages or whatever. But like, whenever you see discourse about this album, people always talk about how it takes them back to an exact moment, or it makes them feel very emotional about a certain relationship or ex-relationship or just a time in their life. And like, people are like, oh, I can't listen to a Frank Ocean song without crying and stuff like that. Like, there's something deeply woven into the very simple, like, I don't want to say simple as like to disrespect it, but it is quite simple compared to like the complexities you can get on like larger, grander scale instrumentations, I guess. But there's something that just tugs at those heartstrings and those nostalgia centers, and I don't know, in a way that I feel very few artists can really.
Yeah, I think that's very true, really. I mean, I think there's also, because it comes back to this thing. I know you guys have talked about this in previous podcasts, but the kind of how using like the voice as an instrument in itself becomes quite a big part of this. It's like when your conventional instruments aren't maybe utilized in the most elaborate way. Definitely in the first half of the album with songs like Nikes and Ivy, his voice is pitched down quite a lot, and it takes on this different kind of narrative purpose. It's like he is a child in those kind of songs. He sounds younger. He sounds like a different person, and therefore you're listening with this element of analysis about kind of which Frank Ocean are we hearing from this time? Like which part of his life is this? So I think there's a lot of the kind of sparsity definitely gives way to the to in a bizarre way the more kind of unique kind of or complex elements of it, and then those being I guess if you're going to apply the word complex to the album, a lot of it comes from the lyricism and the kind of images that are evoked, and also the type of perspective and the narrative and the narrator themselves, like who it is and what the story's being told. It's I think there is some complexities to be found in it, but it's kind of how we engage with it as a listener that they kind of arise. It's an interesting kind of project in that way.
There's depth and evocativeness rather than unnecessary mess, I guess, is the best way maybe to summarize it. There's not loads going on to distract you. There's just the right amount going on to engage you.
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot of like variation in like sonic texture. I'm trying to think of non-pretentious ways to say that, but I'm just gonna say it. There's a lot of like variety in the sort of sonic texture of the album. It does feel like there's a lot of like experimentation in sort of different sounds, instruments, things like that, which I guess maybe adds some of that, some more of that sort of complexity as well. If we're looking for that complex side of the album. I don't want to sort of rewind it too much, but I just wanted to pick up on 2016, that you just mentioned, because 2016 just was a big year. I mean, it was like it almost the point of like, to talk about it is almost cliche at this point, because 2016 was the point of Trump and Brexit and just that general sense of a world being thrown into disarray. And that's only kind of then compounded personally for us by the fact that we were going off to uni and all that kind of stuff. So obviously there's an extra personal degree to which that is true, and probably true of like a lot of the fan base for this, that we're probably bang on the sort of demographic for the people who are now saying, look at this was, this is a modern classic. But, it's not just a personal thing. That's very much in the backdrop of a sort of tumultuous time internationally, really, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that definitely fits in with like what Jack's been saying as well about how like this album feels like a examination of Frank's kind of progression and youth, and then the loss of youth and the loss of innocence and all that kind of stuff, and then that linking into just this kind of general, I don't want to say global scale feeling, but definitely kind of the feelings in the UK and the US. So a lot of the demographic for this audience is, like you say, when you're transitioning to a tumultuous phase, especially when that comes at actually a phase of your life, like we were going to university. But even for people who are maybe more established and yet they're seeing these major political changes and things like that, like I think this kind of album can really connect in difficult times like that, for sure.
Definitely. I mean, I think as well, it's people have kind of continued to engage with it so much because I think I touched on this as well, but just because he hasn't really given like fans much to engage with since. I mean, there has been a string of singles, and he did kind of tour this album, but not as like a solo tour. It was very much kind of live festivals, so like Park Life, I know he did at the time, and Love Box in London. But there wasn't really this sense of this album is going to exist as a Frank Ocean body of work, and he's going to promote the hell out of it. Like, it's just not really his style. So I think because of that, people still kind of get this feeling of, oh well, it's very intimate. It's almost for me. It's not kind of this like, it's not this commodified product. It is very much like a piece of art that people can pick up and take their own experiences to. I mean, there's also downsides to that, because I think his kind of behaviour and his engagement with fans has probably became quite alienating over the years. I mean, it's now kind of very distant.
Yeah. It started off as mysterious and has only gone downhill, really.
Well, I did actually. I saw him at Parklife that year. Have I talked about this on the podcast before, Louis?
You have actually, yeah.
Oh, okay, I have. So I don't want to repeat the full.
Again.
I don't want to repeat the full.
Go on.
Well, I'll try and make it.
I guarantee
version,
whoever. I feel like it was on such an early episode that like the people will have forgotten or wouldn't have listened to that one.
For those who have,
I think it was on the Ronan. It was on the mini-sode, so no one listened.
You're free to speak.
Brilliant. Okay, yeah.
You're good to go.
Well, okay, so basically everything that you're saying there just rings true and is perfectly encapsulated in that experience, because I think he clearly saw the album, saw his role as an artist as being this very intimate thing. So and then also aside from that, there's just all this stuff about his kind of slight, I mean, if you're being generous, like it's some kind of like hyper anxiety or you know, something that sort of leads to a seeming disregard. If you're not being generous, it just is a disregard for his fans. But basically, first of all, he rocked up really late. So like Stormzy was the other headline of Parklife that year. Everybody's in the tent watching Stormzy. Stormzy's like, look, I want to see Frank Ocean too. Please, just I'm finishing the set early. Just don't leave. Stay for this one more song. And he's literally playing "Shut Up," like his biggest tune, and everybody just vacates the tent because everybody's so desperate to get Frank Ocean. Bless him, because he and he was wrapping up early because he knew that was going to happen. But everybody buggers off to Frank Ocean, and then we're just waiting in the kind of drizzle for I think like 40 minutes before he comes on.
Oh,
he comes on and it's just this really intimate vibe on stage, like just him, a mic, a box for him to sit on, and some dude with a camcorder, and the camcorder's then sort of projected on screen. And he then opens with Solo, which, I mean, Solo's a beautiful tune, but it's hardly a banger. Opens with Solo, decides about 30 seconds in, nah, something's not right. And so then stops the song, starts again. He does that again. So he plays Solo, I think 3 or 4 times before he plays the song in full. At this point, he's completely lost the goodwill of the crowd. Proceeds to just do this whole set of all of these slow, intimate tunes to a crowd of off their nut Brits in bucket hats. And it just does not land. I mean, I'm trying to defend him the whole time, just going like, I mean, it's just so genuine, and like him restarting the songs, it's just because he cares so much, and everybody's just like, we're just not having this. Anyway, so that's my Frank Ocean experience, which I think demonstrates kind of everything you've been talking about in the way that he's only sort of gone down that path more and more since, I think.
So what you're saying is, it's not that he's a mystery man who doesn't tour, it's that he's bad at performing live.
Yeah.
And shouldn't
your
tour.
Words, not mine.
Is that your point, Ronan? Is that what we're taking? Is that what we're taking away from this?
I genuinely remain sort of undetermined on it, or at least from that incident, I still left it thinking, actually, you kind of get the sense that this is some quite anxious dude, or like something like that, and that maybe comes through in other stuff. But then also I've just heard horror stories, like wasn't there something where like at Coachella he asked for like an ice rink to be built, and then like the day of he was like, nah, I don't want the ice rink, and they had to like
that was supposed
take it all apart.
That was supposedly, was it last year's Coachella or maybe even this year's now? There was this supposedly this elaborate set that was going to be built, and it was built, and then he decided to strip it all back. And then that whole performance has a similar kind of touch points to what you were mentioning there about being late, not performing songs in full. There is just there's a strange element to his live performances. I mean, I've never been lucky enough to see him, but I think I would still like to. But I almost wonder if his reluctance to perform in a solo headline tour down to that anxiety a bit. It's like he doesn't want the expectation of people paying money just to see him, and it's like it's bizarre.
It feels like in both of those cases, though, just to kind of give him a bit of the benefit of the doubt. I don't know. Obviously, the whole like build me this elaborate set, actually no, tear it down. Not a good look. But like from especially your experience, Ronan, it sounds like one of these kind of classic mismatches of artist and venue. So it kind of reminds me of when we went to see. I've probably told this story on the podcast before as well. But when we went to Love Saves the Day in Bristol, I think it was Love Saves the Day, whichever one it's the Bristol festival that we went to is called, and it was very much like basically mostly around kind of dance music, like electronic dance music and all that kind of drum and bass and everything like that. So the crowd there, everyone who was there for that and that alone. And then they were like, oh, and also we're headlining Slow Tie. And in theory, everyone there is like, yeah, I quite like Slow Tie. But when they're all there and they've been listening to drum and bass all day, and then they go to see Slow Tie at the main stage and they don't know any of his lyrics, and the crowd is basically silent as Slow Tie tries to perform at them, then the vibe's just off. And like, I've seen Slow Tie perform to a crowd of people who go absolutely off their nut for his music and are moshing and singing along back at him and like doing the whole like hero worshipping thing that people do for artists when they're on stage. Like clearly with the right crowd and the right environment, it hits. But with the drum and bass Love Saves the Day, not quite with it, that part of the day crowd, wasn't right, and the whole thing just felt wrong. And if that was your only interaction, you'd just be like, oh, this Slow Tie guy clearly isn't very good live. And I feel like from that kind of Frank Ocean story is maybe he would be happier and better suited to one of these listening bars where we just get him like, you know, get a nice cozy bar going, get him in the corner on a wooden box with a microphone, just a little bit of like a busking vibe, and then he can just have this intimate little set for this little room of presumably very wealthy and lucky people, because I feel like he wouldn't do it for just anybody. But you know what I mean? I feel like that would be a Frank Ocean. That's the kind of environment that you could have a live performance of Blonde in, rather than a grey, rainy tent full of people who are on various drugs at a festival. Like,
yeah, you're not
who've
wrong
just
there.
come off the high of seeing Stormzy. Like, it's a different vibe. It's a different vibe.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Frank's an interesting one to try and like speak for, because like you say, he's so off grid that every single public interaction he has is like, that's all you've got to go off. So you're like, oh, he did this weird live show. Oh, he started this weird clothing company or like luxury products company or whatever, and you don't have any context other than his music to put it alongside. So you're just there like, oh yeah, Blonde's incredible, but this luxury brand company is kind of weird, and then there's nothing in between. So it's like, feels like you don't really know who he is in a way, despite the fact that you have these such like intimate albums that I think people project a little bit onto, if we're being honest.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, it's a kind of tale as old as time, really, in artists similar in Hill and whatnot, where they haven't released loads of music, and you sense this, like the sense of being overwhelmed by the expectation and the stardom and the fame that comes with being just a really good artist. But you also have to be very careful to to either like die on the cross for them, or kind of just to berate them every time they do something which doesn't kind of fit with the narrative, because it becomes difficult, because ultimately there's very little for you to kind of piece together as like a clear idea of this is what they represent. And I've seen arguments before where it's like with Frank Ocean, but also with other artists, of like, people need to stop expecting so much of celebrities, because ultimately they they might have set out to do one thing as an artist, but things change and we can't kind of hold them to the same expectation. I mean, even like now, I guess Arctic Monkeys is a good example of that, because how much they've changed their vibe and their sound over the years. There's always going to be people who are just like, well, this is not Arctic Monkeys. This is a bunch of American losers because they've
that might be me.
But you're entitled to that because ultimately it's a bizarre feeling to watch. Like I could fully imagine Frank Ocean releasing an instrumental dance album like tomorrow or something. And of course, it would frustrate absolutely everyone because that's an even further left field turn from Blonde, and which was again, as I mentioned, a left field turn from Channel Orange. But ultimately, some of the most influential artists do take those turns and do have to make those projects which are going to risk alienating a large portion of their fan base because. Yeah, I guess it must get ultimately the bottom line is it must get quite boring to do the same, have the same persona or perform the same music all the time.
Oh God, yeah. I think we were just talking about that just the other day actually about like there's something about anything that any type of songwriting based performance. How do you keep that fresh? You know, I honestly don't know, and actually, yeah, probably like it's interesting that's a perspective on the Arctic Monkeys thing. You know, they were doing the whole like slowed down performance, or like you know, apparently that was like the whole, and it was just completely like everybody who was there just felt like it was like a miss. But you can imagine how for them that was just their way of like they've been doing this for what, like is it approaching 20 years?
Yeah,
like,
a long time.
Like God, I mean, there must be something quite exciting about, you know, for yourself as a performer being able to sort of inject some new life into that, I suppose.
Debatable whether it's new life, but I'd say
into
less
some sluggish life.
I've zombified my previous songs. I know you hate the new direction we've gone in, so we've gone back and made all of our old stuff.
I feel at this point,
well.
Louis is begging for an Arctic Monkeys for and against podcast episode here, where we need to assemble some.
It is going to have to happen.
It does warrant a whole thing, doesn't it? I suppose.
A whole debate. We'll have to find like the biggest Arctic Monkeys fan, but the problem is we can't find this because it'd be easy to feel like, oh, let's find the biggest Arctic Monkeys fan we know. But then they'd bring on the old material, and I really like the old material. So we have to find someone who really likes the new Arctic Monkeys and will defend their
what you need
direction
a panel.
change.
You need a panel of people all with different relationships. Because I feel like I'd be willing to go on record. I think I did go on record and defend Tranquility Base. I haven't listened to their new one, but
yeah, but you also will probably have some third year trauma with Tranquility Base.
Yeah. I do think that's the catch.
So
that,
I think on a re-listen it might trigger some PTSD.
That's very possible. That is very possible.
It's like one of my mates listened to the Imagine Dragons album back in like year 9 when he was doing art homework, and now he can't listen to it anymore. Because it just takes him back to doing hours and hours of art homework, only to be told that it's a C level project.
I do quite like this some like piece of music and art and film and even a book like that. It has almost intensely nostalgic memories that maybe you don't hate it, but you have to approach it in like very, very careful environments. Like I do get that with Blonde. I mean, as I've mentioned, I have a lot of nostalgia kind of tied up with it, and it's not an album I'm listening to weekly or even monthly. It's something I do kind of. I love to talk about it as I hope its episode's shown, but it's an album that I do kind of approach with caution because it's just very intimate and you have to be in the right headspace for it. But yeah, I think there's other. Ironically enough, that a lot of the music was used in a film in 2019 called Waves. Not sure if you guys have seen that.
Oh, I've not actually. Yeah, I remember seeing it advertised at the time though.
Would definitely recommend.
Is it a film by Frank Ocean?
It's not. I mean, I'm not sure if he had any hand in it.
Oh.
But he did kind of license all of his music, pretty much. Even some songs from Endless, I think, were used in it, which is kind of exists in this grey area of not really released album, not really a demo or whatever. And the album the film rather is really interesting and again touched on these themes of nostalgia and youth and the loss of innocence. But that again is also a piece of work where I'm like, I loved watching that at the time and I had a great experience, but it was also just really intense. And I'm not sure if that's my like go-to film again, because it almost kind of was just like an intense,
too emotionally dense.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested by pieces of like art, whether it be a music, film, or book, that have that. Yeah, that give me that reaction, because I'm like, okay, I don't dislike it, but it's really stirred something up in me that makes me think twice about kind of like approaching it just kind of willy-nilly again.
There's quite a long list of films on my to-do list that are like, oh, I have it ready to go, like Grave of Fireflies, for example. I know that it's going to ruin me, and I don't know if, like, I'm like, when am I in the right headspace for that, really? When can I give myself over to that? And I think that's probably a little bit similar to like knowing that it's like, am I emotionally ready to return to this?
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? I mean, there's definitely something in that. There's definitely something kind of interesting about doing that, but it's kind of, like, at what cost? Like, are you going to be kind of...
Yeah, at what cost? High art, but at what cost?
I was thinking about that as much in terms of, you know, when something becomes fused to memories, you know, like smells. There's certain smells that do that as well. You know, that suddenly you're back in the indoor market of Lancaster or whatever when you were 7 years old, and like there's still a smell that makes me think of that, and I genuinely can't even. I think it's like clean carpet or something. I can't really pinpoint where it comes from.
It just takes you straight there,
and like. Yeah, I get that there are just the intensity of that, like that nostalgic emotion is, and then you want to preserve that thing that does it. You know, like I think that's my motive sometimes for like certain things you don't listen to too often, because you don't want to lose that magic feeling. Like there's only so many things that end up so tightly fused in that way, and it can slip away from you.
Is there any particular like things that the album takes you back to, chat, that you'd be like willing to share if they're not too emotionally raw? Is there like any particular moments?
I have a very kind of strong memory of even just hearing Nikes, because at the time, again, this is very typical of Frank Ocean behavior. He released the music video for Nikes, which I'm sure you can find, if not on YouTube, because his team have probably like licensed that the YouTube can't have it, but on Vimeo or something, there is a music video for Nikes, and it has a different version to it with kind of extended outro and even more dense chipmunk voice, if you can handle it. And I remember listening to that or watching the video in the basement of the uniform shop where I used to work over summer, and just kind of feeling a bit like, damn, this is exciting. Like, this is really exciting. Like, this is new Frank Ocean stuff. And that was kind of a time where I'm just like, was very much just kind of working over a summer, not really sure what uni was going to be like. And I think anything that kind of was new to engage with in terms of music, and I was very excited by. And like, I think, listen to a lot of the album. It didn't hit in the way that it does now, but looking back at it, I'm like, oh wow, that was actually quite a pivotal moment, really. Yeah, and I mean, I guess a lot of the album, I didn't maybe settle into uni straight away, really. Definitely the first semester was, I think for a lot of people, it's always a bizarre kind of expectation of you have to be in these, you have to make loads of friends and have all these kind of social interactions. But yeah, I think in the January after that first semester, as I started to meet a few more people, I came back to this album quite a bit. And I also listened to it at the time I first discovered Rex Orange County then, who very much exists in this type of emotive singer-songwriter pop stratosphere. And yeah, those two kind of albums, Apricot Princess, Rex Orange County, and Blonde, definitely kind of, were kind of cathartic listening experiences when I wasn't maybe feeling myself, because I was like, okay, this is my album I want to listen to, and I just want to, just feel a bit down, but also kind of enjoy something good.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of kind of
a good wallow album.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have a playlist. Speaking of playlists, just called Melancholic Mondays, because
nice.
Mondays are so often associated with, I guess, like being a bit bad, and a lot of this playlist is compiled of that type of. I guess you could even describe it as sad boy music of just kind of singer-songwriters and maybe some slightly electronic notes in these songs, but ultimately they're quite stripped back. And I think ultimately, if anyone takes anything from Blonde, especially a male listener, it's just to kind of give yourself to it a little bit, not being afraid to kind of just enjoy the sadder moments and not kind of have this front of it being like a rap album or like an R&B album. It isn't really that. It's not really that. Showy. It's a lot more emotive, and I think it is. If you kind of submit yourself to that a bit, that's when you get the most from it, I'd say.
Definitely. One thing I just wanted to ask before, I feel like that was a really like beautiful way to kind of summarize it up. So I don't want to trample over that last little bit too much, but I feel like we've covered, unless there's anything else, Jack, that you wanna really touch on.
I guess going back to the material versions of the album, if anyone does have a copy they'd be willing to sell me on vinyl, I'm fully willing to pay.
Please reach out.
Yeah, you can contact me at.
Is it really that?
You can't get.
He did actually re-release it.
Yeah, there was a re-release this year, I think.
Yeah, so...
but that sold out basically instantly. And previous to this year, like if you didn't get it in 2016, it was gone. It was a limited run. If you ever saw it like at a record, I remember I was down in London. It was when I was doing some photography with Eleanor, and we were in this market. And I was like, oh my God, Blonde on vinyl? And I had a closer inspection, and it was just literally like a knockoff copy that somebody had like,
bootleg.
I don't know, like black market, like got on it onto the vinyl somehow.
Yeah.
But no, it's a rarity now, to the point where I tried to get a copy online of Channel Orange, and then I was like, no, I'm definitely being scammed. Like, this is not real.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I guess at this point, like Frank Ocean's refusal to release anything, maybe we are excused as fans for buying bootlegs, but I do wonder where that money goes as well. So maybe not
it's just like how pure would you feel about I feel like you'd kind of have your bootleg, but you'd also kind of resent it a bit.
Yeah.
Because you'd be like, you don't sound quite perfect. Even if it did, you'd just be like, no, you're not. But the question I wanted to ask, just speaking of the fact that he's not releasing anything, is do you think he's left it too long for a follow-up project? The hype being so high, this is constant hype now. It's not like hype in the same way you get when that people got really hyped for Travis Scott's Utopia. But with Frank Ocean, it's just this kind of anticipation. It's been how many years has it been now? 6 years?
7, I believe. Funnily enough, I think it was actually 20th of August with the album release. So we're really close to the anniversary. Very topical.
Almost like it was planned.
Fully.
Definitely wasn't. But yeah, do you think if he ever does more music again, do you think he will? And do you think he'll have to do it under a different pseudonym? Do you think the name Frank Ocean is too laden with expectation?
Was there not talk of him like giving up music after his brother died in a car crash? I want to say his brother certainly passed away at some point, and I thought at that point there was talk that he was never returning to music, and I don't know where that's at now.
Yeah, I guess what I was going to kind of answer on a similar line is that there's 2 really major events which I think have hindered the possibility of a new album, and those are the pandemic. Because at the time he'd had Blonded radio show, which again, for those not familiar, are his kind of like his Apple Music radio show where he would quite famously debut new tracks. So like Chanel was debuted there, one of his singles, and DHL, which was one of these more recent singles, was also debuted on there. And he'd been going through a string of new releases on there, which definitely hinted at a larger project. I mean, I think it was literally about 3 or so songs of new music that were coming out. The pandemic hits, and he'd already been announced for Coachella, which obviously got cancelled and postponed and all of this. And he'd already released some of these songs, along with this kind of very cryptic artwork of like different icons, which all the fans were kind of theorizing, oh my God, all these icons represent songs. And it was just a bit of the kind of usual hoo-ha of anticipation. And obviously, the pandemic put a halt to a lot of that, and almost gave him more reason to kind of retreat into his Frank Ocean hole where he resides for most of the time. And then in more tragic news, he did also lose his brother. So his brother passed away. I'm not sure exact date. I think it was a little bit after the start of the pandemic, but I could be wrong on that. And this was obviously kind of followed by a lot of radio silence, and it's something that he hasn't really discussed much, as he's not really required to, of course. But he did touch on it briefly at the Coachella performance, saying about like how he'd been to Coachella with his brother, and he would like love it and all of this, and that's kind of as close as you've really got to him kind of engaging with, I guess you could say, his trauma and the kind of that event. But
Yeah,
I think what that's ultimately put forward for fans is this idea that he is a grieving kind of artist, and music is probably not at the top of his agenda. So it's a very complicated narrative. I mean, he is undoubtedly working on, or has worked on, new music. I mean, there is endless lists of scrapped projects, from music videos to films to songs. I mean, there's always this kind of like joke that artists will say how like productive he is and how he works like so quickly, and people are like, well, where's the music?
Yeah.
But I think he's just so precious about what he releases. It's almost like to a fault. I mean, perfectionism notoriously robs fans often of releases, but yeah, ultimately you can't rush someone like Frank Ocean, and if we get something new, then I think it will. All I can say for sure is that I do think it'll be quite a shift from the sound that we've already had over his past 3 projects. So I'm definitely anticipating something, but when that will be, I really couldn't say for sure.
it was just exciting to be once again in that situation where you're, like you mentioned earlier, having that moment of, oh, this is cool. I'm experiencing new Frank Ocean stuff. Hopefully we'll get that again.
That would be a rather brilliant day. But yeah, until then, we have Blonde to listen to and all of the
on repeat and keep deciding. Favorite songs then. If we're ready to wrap up the album discussion, you guys want to list off your 3 favorite tracks, if that's even possible to decide?
Sure, yeah. It is tricky picking out tunes, but I think I'm gonna go for Nikes, which I've also already mentioned, and you know, like I mentioned, I never really sort of picked up on the first sort of several times I was listening to the album, and it was years later, just you know, hearing it in a different context. I just think it's a brilliant tune, and something that comes up time and time again on Blonde is I just feel like I'm hearing a tune that perfectly encapsulates that era. It sounds distinctly 2016 in all the right ways, as in like it sounds modern, and obviously 2016 isn't modern anymore, but you know, I just think there's so much music, and it's not always a bad thing, but so much music is made up of pastiches and throwbacks to the past. But yeah, Nikes just sounds 100% 2016 in all the best ways, while still being distinct in its own thing. Also, Nights, which we haven't mentioned yet, but Nights is just iconic, and actually probably another one that I, for whatever reason, didn't sort of pick up on the first several times listening to the album, and it was probably like after reading about the album and people talking about what an iconic track it was that I sort of went back and listened with more attention, I suppose. It's kind of buried there right in the middle of the album, so it's kind of probably just easy to miss if you're kind of listening through the album, but just the greatest beat switch perhaps of all time. It's just an incredible switch into something that changes vibe completely. You know, it starts out a kind of quite a dancing number, which is unusual for the album, then goes into some kind of weird psychedelic chaos before that switch into just the chillest 11 p.m. kind of beat that you've ever heard.
Yeah, 11 p.m. beat. What a way to describe it.
And then possibly my favourite track on the album, or certainly used to be, White Ferrari, which, talking about that kind of Bon Iver vibe, is perhaps the most Bon Iver-y of all of them, and is just a gorgeously beautiful, emotive tune. But in particular, the very last kind of 30 seconds when he goes into a hushed little kind of vocal refrain that just does something for me. I mean, like if I had to like recommend a single part of the album, it would just be those last 30 seconds, just because it's absolutely gorgeous. And I think it is Frank Ocean singing, although I remember like trying to look it up at the time, and there's all sorts of different theories about whether it's actually James Blake or Bon Iver even, or you know, but I think it is just Frank Ocean. let me know if you guys know any different. But God, it's just beautiful, absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, that I think White Ferrari would definitely be on my list as well. It is a really powerful track, and I also just love. I think there's a line. I think it's in that, or it's in. I think it's in that one in White Ferrari, which I believe really encapsulates the kind of nature of the album, and it's something kind of where it says like, if you think about it, it'll be over in no time. It captures, I think, really definitely the kind of the naivety you can have when you're younger about how impactful events in your life will be in years to come, and also just for the album itself, just kind of not to think too much about what you're listening to and the kind of imagery that's evoked. It's very much an experiential album, and yeah, I think that is it's a great track that definitely summarizes a lot of the best points of the album. So that would definitely be on my list as well. I think that last third of the album is actually, once you get past the very bizarre Facebook story kind of just monologue bit, there is some really like interesting and very, very intimate tracks. I definitely have to mention Godspeed as well, because that is a really great kind of track that captures conventional elements of gospel and kind of choir singing, which isn't unfamiliar in R&B tracks or kind of pop music, but it's kind of in this very haunting way that like feels like, without sounding cliche, just feels very godly, feels very kind of like it's evoking a higher power. It's a really kind of powerful track that I think works really well. And also to kind of stay in that area as well, I'd probably pick Siegfried, which I think is a really kind of really interesting track as well, that I think captures a lot of the cool influences of like Gil Scott-Heron and the kind of spoken word poetry of that Frank Ocean's definitely been inspired by. He plays with these kind of weird lyrical patterns in that, and almost like ridiculous lines about thinking about a thought, if you could think about a dream, and all of these bizarre kind of lyrical conundrums, while still keeping it really like emotional and personal, and also kind of making reference to Elliott Smith in that song as well, who was obviously very kind of popular singer-songwriter of the 90s, who kind of operates on a similar emotive level. But I think making that reference to him and using kind of some of his melody in the track really kind of elevates the emotional kind of power of the song. So those would be my kind of three, which ironically enough, as I've just looked at the track list, follow after one another. So it's a hell of a three like track listening experience, really. So, those would be my three. But it's so hard to choose. Nights is obviously a great track, which really which works so well as like a middle track in the album. Like it splits the two halves of the album in this really kind of interesting way.
God, I feel like you've both covered what were my picks more eloquently than I could have done. So I'm just gonna throw out a couple extra moments on there. Obviously, Pink and White and Solo are fantastic tracks, but they're not the ones I want to focus on because I feel like they're kind of like self-evident. I adore the Solo reprise, Andre 3000's verse. I just adore the lyrics of it. I adore the delivery of it. I adore that it was a feature I wasn't expecting to get from a similarly kind of under the radar artist who very rarely makes an appearance. He's quite an elusive guy, as Frank is. So that was quite a highlight moment for me. And another one that I want to kind of shout out is there are these like interesting little the kind of skits, I guess. So like you mentioned the Facebook story.
Yeah.
That one's kind of odd.
Yeah.
But
I sort of love it.
The one I kind of love it for the weirdness of it.
I'm right in front of you. I don't want to do it.
But I love more the Be Yourself one.
Yeah.
I guess it's his like mum leaving a voice note or something. I'm not entirely sure what Frank's trying to use it for, and it is primarily focused on like, you know, don't do the marijuanas and the alcohols, which is, you know, a fair message. But for me, I just like the bit where his mum's just like, be yourself. don't pretend to be anybody else. And I know she's saying it in context of don't let anyone manipulate you into smoking weed or whatever, but I think just generally speaking, it's quite a nice message. And I don't know, there's just a thing about hearing a mum say it with a beautiful backing track in the background and in the setting of a fantastic album. It just hits, It's just like, yeah, be yourself. It's just nice. I think, so they're my shout outs for some of the more quirky moments on the album, I guess.
Very good.
Well, thank you very much for bringing the album onto the podcast for us, Jack, and allowing us all to kind of have another deep dive into such a fantastic album. I feel like it's one of those ones that we could all talk about for a lot longer, but we probably shouldn't.
Yeah, we could probably do
probably
do a full podcast on the skits, on the non-songs. Really, it's
that's the thing. We're going through the track list and like, oh, we haven't discussed this yet. Oh, we haven't discussed this bit. So maybe we'll come next year. We can just do Blonde again. Every year there'll be a Taylor Swift episode, and every year there's just Blonde.
I wouldn't pass up on it. Yeah, I was thinking just as we were doing like the 3 songs and that, there's still more stuff kind of coming up. But yeah, you could just go on forever, I think.
We'll avoid for now, but we'll see. But yeah, thank you very much, Jack.
Yeah, absolutely no problem. Thank you for having me. Been a good discussion, I would say.
Did you manage to put a quiz together for us? I don't know if you
I mean, I could probably do some off the top of the dome just from the sample.
Ooh,
sample
that
kind
sounds
of realm.
fun.
Like,
God.
there's a lot of samples that, at least my experience of the album, are kind of surprised me.
Yeah, there's a cool sample I wanted to give a shout out to as well. Actually, if it doesn't come up in the quiz, I'll mention it at the end. But I'm down for that. Louis, do you want to do the sting?
It's time for the quiz. Do 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 do. Nice, old school. I like it.
That has got me hyped for a quiz. Yeah, so let's start with a sample one then. Which iconic British band? Well, which iconic British? There's 2 actually here, but let's just say with this one, because I feel like this is a good one. Which iconic British band consisting of 4 members does Frank Ocean sample in Blonde? And bonus points if you know the track.
Oh.
I mean, I know one band. I think I know the 2 bands you're talking about.
Nice, you're coming up with 2.
I think I know one of the bands, but I don't know the other one necessarily. I'm pretty, since Ronan seems to be confident, I'm fairly certain that supposedly the Beatles are sampled, but I have no idea where. So that's the extent of my knowledge. I just remember seeing like somebody mentioning that the Beatles are in it.
I'm pretty sure it's like interpolating somehow Beatles on White Ferrari. I'm not sure I've ever gone in. Is that right? I'm not sure I've ever gone in to check it, and then I can say the other band in a moment.
That is right, Ron. On White Ferrari, it's kind of like, I think he also does this on Siegfried with the Elliott Smith stuff, but he kind of borrows the lyrics and a bit of the melody. So on White Ferrari, he said he kind of uses the phrase of here, there, and everywhere, and has that played to a little bit of a melody from the song. So yeah, that's kind of that's the main one that people are aware of. That there is another kind of reference to a British band, as you've touched on there, Ronan. If you are aware of this one, then
yes, this is the one that I wanted to give a shout out to anyway. It's Gang of Four and the song "Love Like Anthrax," right?
Yes, it is. Yeah, which is a really interesting feature. I mean,
it's just a mad one.
Yeah,
and it sounds nothing like it at all. Like it's a really creative use of a sample.
Yeah. So Andy Gill, who's one of the main members of Gang of Four, gives it is listed under Futura Free, which is this kind of really elongated final track, but it's basically a bit of kind of like spoken word. It's a bit of an interview with some of Frank Ocean's friends, and played in the background, deeply embedded within the track is a yeah, as you mentioned there, the sample from Gang of Four, really interesting use of the song, and one that it would be quite hard to pick out, I think, if you were just looking for samples.
God, yeah.
Other quiz questions that we're going to hit you with. How long is the album in minutes, and why is the length significant?
Oh
Oh,
dear.
So it's not.
This would be a closest to, except the significant. So it's like, can it be closest to?
So it's going to be because it's 60 minutes something. I know. So it'll be his dad's birthday or his mum's birthday.
It's 66 minutes, 6666, and that's the devil. I'm not sure how it's 6666, but it is.
So it's officially listed as 60 minutes and 8 seconds. I mean, the significance is kind of it's more just the quirk of the running time. And the quirk of the running time is that the beat switch on Nights to the second separates the first half and the second half of the album.
Right.
Wow.
Whoa.
Yeah. Which I guess adds an element of analysis you can do on what that song means and its purpose within the album arrangement. But yeah, I just find it quite interesting that there's that kind of very perfectionist arrangement of the song and the album.
That does make that makes that beat switch hit all the harder. It's
even harder.
Yeah.
And with this and the samples, there's a lot of attention to detail in the small details on this.
Yeah, definitely. Not final question. I can ask you as many questions as you want. I've clearly got into my question asking mode. The album wasn't nominated for any Grammys of that year. Why wasn't it nominated for any Grammys of that year?
Ooh.
Racism.
Yeah, to be fair.
Is it because there were so many? Was it like because didn't Black Star come out in 2016? Didn't was it Lemonade, or is that a more recent one?
I think that was
Lemonade was 2016.
Yeah, there were a lot of big albums in 2016, but I think Blonde stands shoulder to shoulder with them, so I don't think that's necessarily a reason.
Is there like something really annoying, like the label forgot to submit it or something like that?
Or is it something like the Grammys weren't? I feel like I'm just throwing out different answers now. I'm not actually giving an answer. Was it that the Grammys weren't on in 2016? Was it just something as basic as that?
So the reason that it wasn't is because Frank Ocean purposefully didn't submit it for consideration. This is obviously taking into account the fact that he used the album as like a self-release project. He releases Endless to get out of his contract with Def Jam. He is then kind of like, the sole kind of producer to that, and therefore has the authority to kind of withhold it from awards nominations. So yeah, he doesn't enter it for the Grammys. I imagine, I haven't read loads into this, but I imagine something to do with the fact that the Grammys is not representative of black music and also just kind of the music that he listens to himself. So yeah,
it would have just given him like best hip hop album.
Yeah. I mean,
best urban album or something like that.
Yeah, best urban album.
I was going to say the Tyler Creative Anecdote. Is worth recalling there that his album isn't really considered. It has to be shoeboxed into something. It can't just exist in the kind of more conventional categories.
I'll respect that from Frank. I think that's fair play. I think Ronan gets a point of being fairly close as well. I reckon I'll give you the point for that, Ronan.
What? Just for saying that the label.
You're like they withheld it, which is basically what happened because he was his own label.
I was imagining it like the label fucked up, basically.
Oh right.
I'd feel cheeky,
but not for artistic reasons.
No, yeah.
All right, no point for you then. Nil point. We both suck.
Well, I'll take it for Gang of Four. That's all I need it for.
That's true, actually. All right. Maybe one more question, Jack, and then we can we'll wrap it up from there.
Besides White Ferrari, can you give me one car that Frank Ocean references in the album?
I'm pretty sure I couldn't, but I could make a guess at like, I don't know, Mercedes or but yeah, that's about it. Ford Fiesta.
Ford
Is there
Cortina.
some kind of Nissan in there somewhere?
So, funnily enough, he
probably
does make reference to a Nissan on an Odd Future song that was released a
Oh,
while
damn it.
ago. So,
I was like, he feels like a Nissan kind of guy. He just feels like he would appreciate a Japanese import,
yeah, I mean, I think,
but
again,
non-blonde.
there's another kind of way into Blonde, or Frank Ocean's body of work. If you just want to do one related to vehicles, that's a fully,
Yeah.
like, he is a big car enthusiast, as a lot of his music shows. One of the ones that I was thinking of, at least, is in Ivy, so the second track on the album. And he makes reference to driving to Sid's, obviously Sid being one member of the Internet, the band, and also part of Future, and one of his long friends. And he says we'd drive to Sid's, had the X6 back then. X6 being a reference to the BMW X6, a rather robust, large car that Frank Ocean, we imagine, has owned. So, yeah.
Amazing.
Fantastic. That's far more information on
Ocean
cars
car.
than I thought I was gonna get.
Again, we might just have to do an entire episode where Jack just gives us
Car knowledge.
Frank Ocean lore.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And like, yeah, quiz questions and car knowledge and samples and everything.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, I am.
just too much depth.
Yeah, I don't want to use the word stan, but I do have a big respect for Frank Ocean, and as any big fan should do, they need to know the vehicle references that their artists make. So.
Yeah.
Is an essential part of it.
Definitely.
All right, well, fantastic. Thank you very much for the album pick again, and thank you very much for the quiz. Really enjoyed it, even though I didn't get any points. It was just good to learn. It was just interesting stuff. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. You can find us on all your favorite podcasting platforms, including Spotify, Apple Music, Google Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, etc., etc. We're also on YouTube and on SoundCloud. You can also, if you've had any thoughts or feelings about this episode, you can find us on Instagram at More or Something Else Entirely, or you can email in at moresomethingelseentirely@gmail.com. Obviously they're quite wordy tags, so you can find our links in the description of this episode, as well as timestamps to jump around. We have timestamps for all of our episodes. Give the podcast a rating if you enjoyed. Maybe find one of the polls or the discussion points underneath the episode and give us some feedback. But yeah, thanks all for tuning in. Have a good one.
I think it's quite amazing. You keep on adding up, but your brother's going down like he's supposed to be. Hey, escalator, look at all those waiters darting around the sky like an apostrophe. I think it's quite amazing that you might break the look, but also you're a wonder in your own way.
The communists have nothing to offer but fat cheeks and eyeglasses and lying policemen. And the capitalists proffer napalm and money in green suitcases to the naked. And the communists create heavy industry, but the heart is also heavy.